in the high deserts of Tibet, where ancient trade routes crossed frozen mountains and winds carried the echoes of sacred chants. A new Buddhist tradition emerged during a time of political chaos and spiritual rebirth. This was the 11th century, the age known as Tibet's second diffusion of Buddhism. And from this era arose one of the most scholarly and powerful schools of Tibetan Buddhism, the Sakya tradition. Named after the gray earth of southern Tibet, where its first monastery was built, the Sakya school would become a center of philosophy, tantra, diplomacy, and royal power. Its masters would guide emperors, rule Tibet itself, and preserve some of the deepest teachings of Vajrayana Buddhism. This is the story of the Khön family, the founding of Sakya Monastery, the teachings of Lamdre, and the rise of Tibet's philosopher kings. After the collapse of the Tibetan Empire in the 9th century, Buddhism in Tibet entered a dark period. Monasteries declined. Sacred texts were lost. Regional warlords fought for power across the plateau. Yet Buddhism did not disappear. In remote valleys and mountain hermitages, small groups of monks and translators preserved the ancient teachings. Then, during the 10th and 11th centuries, a spiritual revival began. Indian Buddhist masters once again entered Tibet. New translations of tantric scriptures spread throughout the Himalayas. Pilgrims traveled dangerous mountain passes in search of wisdom. And among the noble families of Tibet, one lineage would shape history forever: the Khön family. According to Sakya tradition, the Khön lineage traced its origins to celestial beings and ancient Tibetan kings. For generations, they practiced spiritual rituals blending early Tibetan traditions with Buddhist teachings. Then came a remarkable figure, Khön Konchok Gyalpo. In the year 1073, he founded Sakya Monastery in southern Tibet. Built upon gray-colored soil, the monastery became known as Sakya, meaning pale earth. From this quiet monastery, a global spiritual tradition would emerge. Unlike wandering yogic movements, the Sakya tradition developed as a highly organized scholastic school. Its masters emphasized disciplined study, logic, meditation, and advanced tantric practice. At the heart of Sakya philosophy stood one of its greatest teachings, Lamdre. The path and its fruit, derived from Indian tantric traditions, Lamdre taught that enlightenment and daily life were inseparable. The result of Buddhahood was already present within the path itself. Through meditation, ethical discipline, visualization, and wisdom, ordinary experience could be transformed into awakening. For Sakya practitioners, every emotion, every obstacle, and every moment of suffering could become part of the spiritual journey. Over time, Sakya Monastery became one of Tibet's greatest centers of learning. Students traveled from across Central Asia to study there. Its libraries preserved thousands of Sanskrit and Tibetan texts. Its scholars mastered philosophy, poetry, medicine, astronomy, and ritual arts. But the Sakya school would not remain only a spiritual institution. It would soon become a political power unlike any Tibetan Buddhist tradition before it. In the 13th century, a new empire thundered across Asia: the Mongols, led by descendants of Genghis Khan. Mongol armies conquered kingdoms from China to Eastern Europe. Tibet, too, fell under Mongol influence. But instead of destroying Tibetan Buddhism, the Mongols became fascinated by it. One Sakya master in particular captured their attention: Sakya Pandita, a brilliant scholar, diplomat, and spiritual teacher. In 1244, he was invited to the Mongol court. There, Sakya Pandita forged an alliance that would change Tibetan history forever. The Sakya lamas offered spiritual guidance. The Mongols offered military protection and political authority. This relationship became known as the priest-patron system. Soon after, the Sakya school was granted authority over much of Tibet under Mongol rule. For nearly a century, Sakya leaders governed Tibet as both religious and political rulers. Their influence spread across the Himalayas and into the court of the Yuan dynasty in China. One of the most important figures of this era was Phagpa, a nephew of Sakya Pandita. Phagpa became spiritual advisor to the Mongol emperor Kublai Khan. The emperor respected him so deeply that he granted him enormous authority over Tibet. Phagpa even created a new script for the Mongol Empire, known as the Phagpa script. For a moment in history, the Sakya school stood at the center of Asian politics. Yet political power brought challenges. Rival schools competed for influence. Regional conflicts intensified. And eventually, the Sakya political system declined. By the 14th century, new powers emerged across Tibet. But although Sakya rule weakened, its spiritual legacy endured. The Sakya masters continued preserving rare tantric teachings passed down through generations. Their monasteries became guardians of sacred art, ritual music, philosophy, and meditation systems. The architecture of Sakya Monastery itself reflected this legacy. Massive fortress-like walls, ancient murals, and vast libraries filled with manuscripts created an atmosphere unlike any other monastery in Tibet. Some texts there survived nowhere else in the world. The Sakya tradition also became famous for intellectual debate. Monks trained for years in logic and Buddhist philosophy. Public debates sharpened memory, reasoning, and spiritual understanding. Wisdom was not seen as blind belief, but as something to be tested through direct insight and disciplined thought. Today, the Sakya school remains one of the major traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. Its teachings continue in Tibet, India, Nepal, Bhutan, and across the modern world. After the Chinese occupation of Tibet, many Sakya masters escaped into exile. New monasteries were established in places like Dehradun and Kathmandu. Ancient manuscripts were rescued from destruction. And the teachings of Lamdra spread far beyond the Himalayas. Even now, inside remote monasteries illuminated by butter lamps, Sakya monks continue chanting prayers first heard centuries ago. The Grey Earth Monastery still stands, a symbol of survival through war, empire, exile, and time itself. And the Sakya tradition endures as a bridge between scholarship and mysticism, politics and spirituality, wisdom and compassion. A tradition born from the pale earth of Tibet that helped shape the spiritual destiny of the Himalayas forever.